Oh man, hey, what's up, everybody? This is Brendan with Evoke Bike. I am so excited to have this next guest, Jason Hilimire, on. One of my first coaches. He is the man that really started it all. He coached not only myself, but also Patrick. Jason was a mentor for me, not only as an athlete, but as I told him, hey, I think I want to get into coaching, as I left coaching my CYO basketball team and really delved into cycling. And he supported me, helped me understand the big picture of things. And he really was one of the people you hear me say all the time, see the forest from the trees. And just his guidance, man, Jason, it makes me so, I don't want to say emotional, but man, just thinking back of how much you've instilled in me, I'm so grateful for that. But to help all you guys out in this podcast, Jason's a former pro class mountain biker. We talk about a couple of the disciplines early on so the roadies can keep up with the terms, but it really dives down into like things about using normalized power. What about heart rate versus power? What about cadence training? A lot of these things as a roadie or whatever discipline you're really proficient in, you can take some of these tips and use on your own. I really like some of the big gear stomping conversations, talking about power versus speed, and then really, as we finish up this one, talking about confidence and how Jason deals with some of this when he's looking at some crazy downhill sections. And then there's definitely going to be more in the second episode. So Jason, thanks so much for this. We really appreciate you coming on. Everybody enjoy the episode. Hope you have a great day of training. See you later. Dude, awesome. Well, I appreciate you sitting down to do this. I think you've been mentioned in probably like 17 podcasts. So number one, I was like, I got to bring the man on who started all these wheels spinning. Number two, I haven't really had someone that has some good mountain bike experience that I even have some questions that a lot of the guys that race mountain bikes with me are also doing road or gravel. So we focus more on the fitness side and then the skills they do with their buddies. But I think just talking about some of that training and specific stuff that I've hit you up, like, hey, what would you do with this guy, is good for other people to hear.
Yeah.
And just, yeah, man, I just had to get you on. You are like the guy that started all of this. And even with Wally, he's brought you up in some of these things. So it had been what I thought was the easiest question, but it turns out to be the hardest question for everybody. Who is Jason Hilimire?
Who am I? Well, right now I'm mostly a dad and former cycling coach and somewhat washed up bike racer.
Still ride.
I still ride. I've basically ridden every kind of bike racing there is. I started as a mountain bike racer, primarily XC focused. Switched to a little bit more endurance, 100-miler, 6-hour, 24-hour solos. Dabbled in road on my way there. Became a full-time coach, moved out to Colorado, did that for a number of years. Still actively raced, out here in the pro class and whatnot. And then tried my hand at the enduro thing. Found I liked that a lot. Kind of was a bit of everything, of all the, things I had grown up racing and just really liked the new style of racing. So kind of that's been what I've been doing the last couple of years.
That's awesome. And if people are just catching wind of our podcast here, Jason I got to give Minerva his shine. He was technically my first coach. And then once like a few months went past, I got my Cat 3. He's like, okay, you need a real coach. You need to go talk to Jason. And you I think you were just going out to Colorado. You were really getting your feet going in full time, because then you came back and we were teammates on the road for that year before you moved there full time. And really, Jason was the guy that, man, I think back, dude, I had to have been an annoying athlete at times because I had so many questions and relentless emails. So I apologize for that. Like I think of that sometimes and I'm like, God, dude, Jason was so good to me. Like, I hope he knows how much I appreciate that, because
no, I think that was great because it probably helped me grow just as much as a coach, because that was my early years and, helping me push, learning and knowledge and questioned even myself, I think made us both better. so to speak.
Man, 100%. Like I always try to tell people, like, I encourage those questions because it keeps you on your toes. You don't want to tell an athlete like, "Oh, you keep me on my toes," but it's true. Like, athletes need to understand when you're not just mute. Like, yeah, there's a balance between being annoying and having good questions. Like, don't ask the same question 20 times. Process it, think about it. How does it apply to your training and move forward? But like you really, even when I was like, hey, I think I might want to like try to start coaching because I was coaching basketball then, and it was really ruining my ability to do long rides because I'd have like CYO basketball game at 1, and I'm like, oh, that's dead in the like you can't do it all early in Rochester, you can't do it all late. And you were really the one who was like, hey man, just start learning. And I think we all have imposter syndrome when we start. And you said to me, you were like, just remember, like, this science is so new that no coach, the number one coach in the country right now, does not know everything, and no one ever will. Like, find your process, move through it with athletes, and learn, learn, learn. And that's just been, I think back to that. I mean, you gave me so much confidence in believing that I could help someone out, and also kind of showing, it's not just the numbers. Like, you race a ton, go talk to them about that. Like, if you have someone that really wants to get their feet wet, like, you're doing that, go do that. So thank you, man. I mean, this is like, I don't know, it takes somebody to like believe in you and motivate you, and we'll get into that. But what's so for let's jump into the mountain biking stuff though. So
Mhm.
I know the general, like, difference between the XC, the enduro, when you do the crazy insane downhill stuff. Before we drop terms and get into training, can you just give a quick overview for the roadie out there who might be like, wait, what are these different disciplines that they're talking about?
Sure, sure. I mean, cross country is, your, I guess, Olympic style of mountain bike racing. It's typically an hour and a half, 2 hour, you know, race with your age groups or your class groups. Single track, mountainside, technical terrain, up, down, all around. Usually doing a number of laps on the course. There's a feed zone as you come through every couple laps or every lap, depending on the size. Um, Hard, fast, brutal efforts.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have your kind of endurance style races, a 6 hour race or, time length races. They can be held on the same cross country course and you're just doing more laps.
Mm-hmm.
That's a popular format. And, your 100-mile races can be point to point or big loops or whatnot. They're a little bit, they're kind of like gravel races.
Mm-hmm.
Long, all day efforts. You gotta plan for the amount of food and calories you're going to take in. You're not sprinting out of the gate as much as a cross country esque race. And just trying to balance your efforts all day and basically a long, 6 to 8 hour time trial, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak, with other competitors out there.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to ask you. Like, a lot of times guys, we'll talk about a race and it is like just a super long TT, which is how some of these gravel races eventually went once it shatters. But if you're talking to an athlete that really wants to win, that's trying to get on the podium, like, what do they need to be prepared for in maybe the different disciplines of, we had talked one time, you're like, there's always the guy who starts it way too hard. So you just got to be ready for like a blistering pace, but it might not always be like that. Are there any threads between the three that are like, you relate to train as in you got to be able to like go super deep for the first 5 minutes and then it's more threshold? Or how long does that last for? Or just like a road race, you can't predict it and the race just happens as the racers race it?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to predict it, but typically what you're going to find is the big guns are going to go out of the gate exceptionally fast.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to be with them, you're going to have to be ready. And that could happen 5 minutes or 50 minutes into the race. Um, it, it just depends on the course profile and where they think they can kind of get away. If you have single track coming up in the first 10 minutes, people are going to want to get out in front and be clear and get a good ride and rhythm out there. If you've got, 40 miles of road to work with and then some big climbs, there's going to be a bit of a slower pace and probably some attacks to splinter the group here and there. So I guess it's kind of course specific, and, just kind of knowing and understanding the courses that you're racing and where they happen, it can be helpful to kind of prioritize where you want to kind of make your move or your efforts. Some races, have a lot of climbing all day long, and it's just constant up, down. One that comes to mind is like Shenandoah Mountain 100. It's so much climbing. It's I forget, 10, 12, some odd thousand feet of climbing in 100 miles. And there's at mile 60 is like a 13-mile long gravel road, super tough climb. And you've already had 6 or 7 climbs in your legs at that point, and you got to do this just soul crusher climb, I think is the nickname of it, and you're out in the sun and the heat and the dust, and you got to be prepared, after having gone really hard, because that race starts, a little bit of a fire road. It's not quite single track, not quite, road, but it's narrow. It's a long, twisty climb where everybody tries to get up the front because there's 800 people, going out there with you. You don't want to be stuck near the back or whatnot. I don't think there's quite that many people anymore, with the current situation, but, you had to fight to get up in the top 50 and be there. And then you got to hold those spots, something like Leadville. That's also part of the race is you're just fighting to get in front of people and not have to deal with these masses going up the power line, climb up and down and stuff like that. So, it's not always as much that, total effort of the race is just, you got to get in front of people because otherwise you're just stuck passing and jumping through groups all day long.
Where's that Shenandoah race?
That is in Virginia.
Yeah, dude. So I was talking to a guy and we were talking about gravel stuff, and he had somebody. Do you race with one teammate in that race?
I don't believe so, but they could do something like that.
Okay, because there was somebody and they were like, "Oh, dude, I heard like for a big dude, like you're pretty decent at climbing." Da da da. And we started talking about this race, and he's like, "Okay," and then there's like a lot of technical descending and down. I'm like, "Oh, wait, hold on a second. Nobody wants to be my teammate if they're dependent on you with technical descending."
Maybe that could be like the off-road Mount Mitchell or something.
I don't know.
That's down there like that.
I was like, "Yo, I'm tapping out. That's not my thing." He's like, "Really?" And I was like, "No, literally." I went out into like Duran Eastman with a buddy, and we still laugh about this. He's just like a casual mountain biker, and so he's like, "Dude, you're probably gonna be really fast." I'm like, just wait. From the bottom of the hill, he's yelling, "Last break," and I'm like, So yeah, that one's not for me. So then it's interesting with, we're talking about the positioning, these big races. And I want to tie this into when you were around a lot of other coaches, some things that you saw in coaches, but how does a mountain biker that maybe is mountain biking all the time use power data when they're going to, like, I'll get somebody that comes on like, "Hey man, what do you even see in this file? I see this." And so we've talked a lot, like heart rate's one thing. If you're going to do some like VO2 max stuff, you might want to rely on heart rate and da 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 da. But what are those? It's so much dirtier than a power file from a road racer. What should they be looking for? And this is such a huge question, but that they can take out and be like, "Okay, I'm not executing this." And maybe it depends on the type of workout they're doing, but how do you guide somebody that's trying to coach themselves in mountain biking? They're like, "I know I have to have a power meter, but damn, this looks sloppy."
Agreed. And you kind of got to look at a little bit more normalized power for mountain bike racers.
Okay.
Just because it helps encapsulate it a little bit easier. But again, the power is very stochastic. You have so much on and off, especially if it's more cross country kind of technical racing where you're on a lot of single track. It's not you're not going to see that kind of stuff so much on dirt road or the kind of long gravel style racing. But, the cross country-esque, racer, you got to basically try to keep yourself from going super high and super low. You've got to be strong enough and good enough to do these repeated efforts where you're getting stuck in a big gear, coming out of a corner, the sudden change of terrain. You don't know when you have to throw that little bit of muscular power over a root just to get up the top of a hill. And then you get up the top of the hill and now you're suddenly spinning 110 RPM for 5 seconds and you have another 10 seconds uphill at 40 RPM. So, you got to be able to do kind of that, stompy-esque power, be able to, change your cadence rapidly and whatnot. And the kind of, goal when I was racing was you just try to hold your overall average power pretty high. I would always use normalized power. I never really looked at my current power on the system. Just you couldn't. It was just flashing up and down way too much. I guess. I mean, now the devices can give you 3 and 10-second power.
Yeah.
Which is probably, the 10-second power maybe for mountain biker is good to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of see your smoothing over that. They didn't have that, when I was racing cross country. You had either instantaneous or normalized.
Oh, dude.
You didn't have those numbers.
It's funny that you bring up 3 and 10-second because I've actually told people think like mostly roadies are like, oh, well, 3 is better. The problem that people do have with a 3-second is that since it's lagging a little bit from like your rolling average, they're going over, under.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, yo, dude, just use like 30-second if you want to use that. And like, let's go really big picture. That's interesting. So did you used to do low cadence, high torque stuff intermixed with high cadence, like really short, or is it like just do a long high torque session or just do, sorry, I'm having a hard time saying this. Would you do like a 5 to 10 minute low cadence and then like a 5 to 10 minute high cadence, or would you just like go totally random in a training?
No. So, I mean, you would maybe start off in the early season with your typical muscular tension intervals. I mean, you know all about those.
Yeah.
Doing the slow, low cadence power, building that strength in those legs.
Mm-hmm.
And then gradually transition to doing, the sprint and gym work, trying to get the leg speed up. And then as you got closer to race season, and when I use, kind of micro burst efforts where you would basically put it in your big ring, big gear, and just stomp on the pedals for, anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds, depending on, fitness and where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And then just as soon as the effort's done, shift to the granny and just bury the cadence as high as you could to recover for 30 seconds or whatnot. And then you just shift it right back and go again. And you're just trying to get yourself to go from low to high, low to high, low to high, and get those, cadence and muscular tension, both at once.
Yeah.
And just being able to, tolerate the high heart rate, everything, the lactate, everything all at once. Did things like tractor pulls, or stomps, where you would do the very similar thing, but more from a standstill also.
Okay.
Put it in a really big gear and just, almost at a stop or a very low roll and just try to go, from almost no cadence to getting it up to 100, just, getting yourself used to those, roll ups and terrain and stuff like that. But I mean, again, at the same time, there's no substitute than just riding trail and trying to get that done. Of course, I mean, that's obviously for a mountain biker way more fun than doing efforts. But, if you really want to be a mountain bike racer, structured training is where it's at.
So definitely, I was gonna ask you that. What would your split be for someone that's solely mountain bike focused? Okay, do how many days? And I know this depends on so much. So like we're giving a high level viewpoint here, people, but like 50-50, be on the trail with your skills, 50%, 3 days on the trail, 3 days doing intervals, or I guess it depends on how good they are on the trail. Just find their weakness. Okay.
Exactly. It's very dependent. I mean, almost nearly every recovery day, probably on the road.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Because otherwise it's nowhere near recovery. They're like, I had a recovery day, so I took a spin in the park. I'm like, dude, look at this file. You were not spinning. Or maybe you were really hard.
With the exception of doing very specific race efforts, maybe your threshold and stuff, sweet spot, you're higher, long day efforts you want to maybe do out on the road or long stuff, you can start to bring your VO2 max and, a little bit above threshold, zone 6, 7 onto the off-road, because especially someone that's weak with skills, they need to be able to focus on skills at the same time they're going as hard as they can.
Yes.
You don't want to start out of the gate with that, but start to blend that together and get them, I can remember, I obviously raced forever, doing mountain bike and I thought I had the skills. And when I switched to the enduro style racing, where you're going downhill fast, super speeds, out of the gate, I can remember racing and it was so physically hard and that it gave me such tunnel vision that I couldn't see the trail, couldn't actually even focus. And I learned over time, like I was actually going too hard on the trail, because what you're doing is you're sprinting as hard as you can. You have to break into the corner, scrub all your speed in the corner of the technical section, and now I'm sprinting as hard as I can to get back up, thinking I'm losing time. When in reality, it's kind of tone it down. You don't have to break as much, just carrying momentum and speed. And now I'm not actually going as hard, but I'm going way faster.
Dude, that's a good point. Speed
So
at the end of the day is what's going to win the bike race, not the watts.
Exactly. And in mountain biking, that's a big thing too, is as much learning technique, learning when to corner, learning how to corner, learning how and when to pedal into sections. And it took me a long time to understand that and learn that to kind of get that flow and not waste energy on the bike. You can, not have to go anywhere near as hard and save that energy for the climb in a race or whatnot. A lot of people, misunderstand that. And that's kind of why you sometimes see, these big, strong roadies come out and they're the fastest guys and they get beat by guys that they would crush on the road or whatnot. And it's because these guys aren't using any energy whatsoever. They're just kind of flowing through the trail and not wasting it. And they know when and where they can put power down and, keep their momentum going forward. And it's a similar thing that carries into cyclocross. And
I was just going to say that was me in cyclocross. People are like, you're going to be so good at this, Brendan. And I was like, I can't wait. And I was like, this is hard as hell. I hate this. Dude, you told me for bat and kill, and that was one of the things you sent me on that. I actually might have been blowing up your phone that day. I was like, yo, I'm lost, man. There was I did not have I don't even know if Garmin Maps existed then, but you were like, you didn't know that I'm horrible with directions. And I was like, all right, at this church, for people that haven't been to Bristol, New York, it's like backwoods. I don't know. It's like, it's like if you're up in the mountains somewhere, but like
northern Appalachia.
Exactly. I'm on these dirt roads, but your thing was that was huge help, because I was a newbie cyclist and going to bat and kill, and you're like, shift when you're riding, whatever gear you're in, shift down one harder so you sit down more, you have more traction, and just do some of these efforts where you feel like you're going really freaking fast because you're going to be racing on a dirt road and you're not used to doing that. And I was like, okay. And I remember being in Naples being like, oh man, what am I getting myself into? This is pretty gnarly. And it's tame. It's like as packed down dirt as you can get. But when you've gone from the road and only ridden that and you go off-road a little bit, it was crazy. But that was what made me feel so much more comfortable in bat and kill. And it was a game changer. It's kind of, we're so focused on watts now, especially more and more these days, like people that I talk to, and I'm like, just think about the race. Like, what's the race going to entail? Like, and I keep using him as an example. Justin Williams was on a podcast and he's like, wait, just so we're clear, this is like half watts and half of this thing called bike racing, because everyone's just like, what's my FTP? What's my VO2 max? Okay, I'm going to go win everything. It's like, man, I'm sure you've seen some athletes that have crazy numbers, 10th place, 11th place, 14th, 8th. They just can't figure out all the little things in the race.
Yeah, there's such a big art to bike racing and so many little nuances, and it just takes experience and time and patience. And, we talked about it, over text and whatnot, not being afraid to fail, to do things that might not work, but they might. You never know until you try. You can't just sit there in the pack and be like, well, those guys are off the front. We'll bring them back at the end,
Mm-hmm.
or in any race, you got to be like, well, maybe I need to bridge across. Maybe I need to be the one to attack.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's different. Maybe you never know. Like in mountain bike racing, cross country is the easy example. The race starts really hard, and then basically it settles in, and you're just kind of jumping from group to group or working yourself. It's like, you got to learn to be that guy that sprints out of the gate, even if you're afraid and are like, I can't do that. I don't want to do that, because I don't think I can recover. Well, you got to go do that and force yourself to be up there. And it's maybe you're going to sit up there for 5 seconds one race, and then you're going to shuttle back to 10th. But you can get there. And
Mm-hmm.
now you got to do the work. Next race, you're up there for a minute, and now you shuttle back to 7th. And then, by the end of the season, you're the guy off the front winning the race by 5 minutes because it took a little bit of time. It's everything, that you can think of doesn't happen overnight. Nobody just suddenly started in one. I mean, think of all the things that we do in our lives every day and see simple things. It's like, you didn't start like you're talking about. You're an established coach now. One day you started from nothing. You asked
Yeah.
questions and wanted to get there. You didn't suddenly weren't there. It took
Yeah.
years. And people that bike race think that, oh yeah, I got my FTP up now, it's all there. It's like, well, okay, there's a lot of other pieces. You got to build a lot. And it's just going to take time for some people to get there. Some people are patient, some people aren't.
It's, man, it's almost like you're listening in on this conversation I had with an athlete who, super strong dude, new, like so new that he's like, okay, so I feel embarrassed to say this, but I'm kind of like nervous in a group. And I'm like, dude, that's normal. Like, especially it's been COVID. You're going to a bike race, and when was the last time you rode with people? Like, I'm gonna be nervous. He's like, really? I was like, yeah, dude, like you're about to go 30 miles an hour down a road on skinny tires with a bunch of other humans like on top of each other. It's kind of nerve-wracking. And we were talking about his goal for the race was he's strong enough that he's more comfortable in the back. Okay, understand that. And then as people start to get dropped, he's like, I ride around them. And I'm like, so you're wasting tons of energy. And he's like, well, I just don't feel like I belong in the front. I was like, okay, do you know what you're going to do? This race, we don't care at all about the result. I want you to ride towards the front and figure out how to get in on the front. Like, figure out how to work with people. Like, if the one guy is a jerk and doesn't let you in, the next guy might, or the next guy. Then you get in the pace line and like work with people. And like, you don't want to be on the front, but like, just watch moves and all the little things of being able to put yourself because into a move to get in a break. Or like you're saying, I'm like, dude, why don't you attack people? He's like, I don't know. I was waiting to see if somebody else did that. I'm like, I mean, if somebody else can do it, you can do it, right? And if you blow up, you blow up. And if you get caught, whatever, like you gotta roll the dice and try and figure things out. And you made a really good point earlier about conserving energy where we hear it, but I think the newer cyclist, once the race starts, it's like your adrenaline's going. It's hard to calm down. You're like, it's still a new process. And I told this lady, I'm like, don't work. Like, she's strong. And so she's like, well, I was in the front the other day. And I'm like, that's the wrong spot. You have no teammates. You want to sit in. And I don't know if you told me this or if I heard it somewhere, but the line was, it's not who pedals the most, it's who pedals the hardest when it really matters. And she made it through it. She's made it to the end of the race with the lead group. She still is like figuring out the sprint, but she was like, oh my God, I made it to the end with everybody. And I'm like, because you can serve, like, just. And so I think sometimes we just need to take a step back, no matter whether you're brand new or you're like, if I go to a race and I'm racing pros, I have to recalibrate, like, all right, where can I conserve? How can I try and get as far down the road with these dudes at my like most energy level so that I can even try and compete? And I think we all can forget that at times because just the race starts and it's just like adrenaline's going, and it's easy to forget the easy, most basic lessons sometimes when you're just like amped and ready to go.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think some of it sorry,
No, go
goes
ahead.
back to your previous racer you're talking about, where he didn't feel comfortable or confident riding at the front. Um, and sometimes the, at least for me, the best races I've ever had are the ones where I went in the most confident. And I'm sure you've probably seen that with your athletes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always the watts that need to be turned. It's the confidence. And if it's there, you'll do things and try things and push yourself. And sometimes, you might not have the confidence to do things or believe it, but you guys kind of fake it till you make it.
Till 100%.
Pretend you're someone else. um, you know, for me, the enduro racing is a lot of it is skill based.
Mm-hmm.
Efforts downhill, and I sometimes I know I can't do certain technical trails, or I just don't feel comfortable that day or something. So in my head, I just flip a switch and be like, well, you know what? I'm this pro downhiller today,
That's
and it just
awesome.
boosts my confidence and makes me like, you know what? Would this guy be scared of this section? I'm still scared of it, but now I'm like, I'm going in my head. I have a bit more confidence to give it and try it, and then I'd feel great. And I'm like, you know what? Okay, that wasn't that hard. I
Yeah.
just needed to clear that obstacle in my head. I have the skills. I've done all these little things before. This is just a little bit bigger of a step, and just go do it, and then just pretend you're someone else, and soon enough you will be that someone else, so to speak. After a while you won't have to fake it, because it's just that's what you've been doing all this time.
Dude, I love that because I don't really think of not being a mountain biker. I don't think as often as I should of like that fear factor that is in those disciplines. For me to hear you, I mean, I watch the videos you post. We've talked about this stuff in the videos you send me. I'm like, that is absolutely terrifying. And I mean, to hear you be like, okay, I'm kind of nervous about this, like that blows my mind. Like I didn't think you had any fear of riding almost anything. And
Oh, I think you'll find that everyone has fear. It's just a standard thing. It's just, confidence is a big thing.
yeah.
Skill repetition, understanding your comfort levels, understanding where you are. For any mountain biker, of yours that might be scared, of something.
Hey, everybody, this is Brendan again. We will be back with part 2 with Jason as we dive into more training topics that really, whatever discipline you're in, you'll be able to use to get faster, get stronger. Good luck with your training until we see you on the next episode. And if this was helpful, as always, please share it with a friend. We greatly appreciate it.